As Trump told him, "Sit down, boy." But Obama's calm, sharp comeback totally changed the feel of the whole place and left everyone, even his critics, amazed. The cameras were already rolling when it all went down. The kind of moment that doesn't just fill a space, it stops it cold. The bipartisan meeting on race and leadership, held inside the Phoenix Convention Center, was supposed to be about talking it out, about getting two American presidents, one current, one past, to discuss the nation's future. But everything was different in a single instant. President Donald Trump leaned into the microphone, his eyes narrowed at Barack Obama, and said the words that would echo far beyond those walls. "Sit down, boy." Gasps filled the audience. You could actually hear people's breath catch in shock, like the sound of air rushing out of a balloon all at once. The silence that came after was almost loud. Thousands of people packed into that hall sat frozen, just waiting for what would happen next. In the first row, a pastor from Detroit slowly shook his head, his lips pressed together. 2 rows behind him, a young college student in a navy hoodie mumbled, "Did he really just say that?" as his phone went up in the air to start recording. CNN's cameras didn't miss a thing, and neither did Fox News. Every channel had their lens on the stage, ready to capture history, though nobody knew they were about to get something bigger than politics. Trump leaned back in his chair, almost pleased. His supporters in the audience laughed nervously, not sure if it was the right time to clap. Some smirked, others looked away. But on the other side of the room, you could see people visibly shaking with anger. A woman in her late 60s grabbed her necklace like she was trying to steady her own heartbeat. The feeling in the room was clearly divided, half in shock, half unsure. And then there was Obama. He didn't lunge forward. He didn't smack his hand on the table. He didn't even raise an eyebrow. Instead, he leaned back a little, put one hand on his lap, and with the other, smoothed out his jacket. That small, deliberate action had more power than 1,000 words. It told the audience that he was in charge. It told them he wasn't going to be pulled into a shouting match. For a few long seconds, Obama said nothing, and that quietness got heavier with each passing moment. Some in the crowd began whispering, filling the void. Is he going to reply? Did he hear it? What's he waiting for? Up in the press area, reporters fumbled with their laptops, trying to write sentences for tweets that hadn't even been finished yet. Even the moderator, Professor Harold Stokes from Arizona State University, shifted in his chair nervously, his eyes darting between the two men like he was watching a train crash in slow motion. The camera zoomed in closer. You could see the strain in the lines of Trump's face. You could see the calm thought in Obama's. And you could feel the weight of the moment settling into the air, like a storm nobody could stop. Did you hear what he just said? A woman whispered to a local councilman from Mesa. This is going to be everywhere by morning. The councilman just nodded without a word, his eyes fixed on the stage. Trump, sensing the silence wasn't working for him, leaned toward his microphone again. What, did I say something wrong? He asked, smirking. His tone was sharp, almost taunting, as if daring Obama to get upset. But Obama didn't react. He pressed his lips together in a slight half smile, tilted his head a little, and just stared at Trump. The crowd broke into nervous whispers. It was the kind of look people give when they've already decided that words will matter more than yelling. In that moment, everyone knew something was coming. The quiet before the storm was almost too much to bear. Even a Fox News analyst at the edge of the press row leaned over to a colleague and whispered, "If he speaks, this whole thing changes." Every eye in the room was on Obama. Even Trump, tapping his fingers against the table impatiently, couldn't look away. And the heavy feeling of expectation grew until the room itself seemed to pulse with it. What came next wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a counterattack. It wasn't anger. It was something completely different, something sharper, stronger, and impossible to ignore. But before Obama opened his mouth, the silence itself was already telling a story that America wouldn't soon forget. For almost 10 seconds, the silence held the entire Phoenix Convention Center hostage. It was the kind of quiet that makes your throat dry and your palms sweat. The crowd instinctively leaned forward, like the air itself between the stage and the audience had thickened. Nobody wanted to miss the next move. Obama didn't rush. He reached for the glass of water at his side, lifted it carefully, and took a slow sip, The sound of the microphone picking up the ice clinking in the glass was oddly loud. When he put it back down, his movements were steady, on purpose, almost like a ritual. That calmness bothered Trump more than if Obama had yelled. The president shifted in his chair, tapping his fingers louder against the desk this time, glancing out at the crowd as if to remind them he was still in charge. Someone in the front row whispered, "Why isn't he saying anything?" Their voice broke with both worry and hope. A woman next to them replied, "Because silence is louder right now." You could see the truth of that right then. Every second Obama stayed quiet was a second Trump lost control of the stage. Reporters in the gallery stopped typing completely, their fingers frozen above the keys, waiting for that first word. Cameramen leaned closer to their lenses. A boy in the audience, no older than 12, tugged at his father's sleeve and asked, "What did he mean by boy?" The father, eyes still on Obama, mumbled, "You'll understand when you're older." Trump couldn't stand it any longer. He leaned forward again, his voice dripping with annoyance. "What?" No response. "I thought you had something to say." His laugh was sharp, but it didn't land the way he wanted it to. It scattered awkwardly in the air, bouncing off walls that weren't on his side anymore. Finally, Obama shifted in his seat. He put both hands on the table, leaned slightly toward the microphone, and looked at Trump not with anger, but with something sharper, a kind of patience that cuts deeper than fury. "I'll respond," Obama said softly. The words were simple, almost quiet, but the crowd reacted like a fire had been lit. Phones went up higher. Reporters got back to work. The silence broke, but only a little, because everyone wanted to hear every single word that followed. But Obama didn't rush. He sat back again, giving the room a chance to breathe. The weight of anticipation grew even heavier. He let Trump get anxious, and that self-control itself was a message. He wasn't going to be pulled into Trump's rhythm. In the third row, a group of local high school students leaned against each other, their eyes wide. One of them whispered, "Man, he's about to tear him apart." Another nodded slowly, not daring to blink. The moderator, Professor Stokes, tried to step in. "Gentlemen, if we can..." But he stopped himself. He knew this wasn't his moment to control. The country was watching something raw, something without a script, and his job was to let it play out. Obama glanced briefly toward the moderator, then back to Trump. He adjusted his tie, not nervously, but like a man getting ready for a show on his own terms. Every small action seemed to stretch time, grabbing attention in a way words hadn't yet. "You know," Obama finally began, "I've been called a lot of things in my life." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But respect has never been something I had to beg for." The crowd roared. The burst of applause filled the hall like thunder. People jumped to their feet. Some clapped until their hands were red. A black pastor in the front row raised his hand high and shouted, "Amen." Trump smirked, rolled his eyes, and said something under his breath, but the cameras caught it. "Give me a break." Obama didn't let the noise last too long. He raised his hand slightly, and the crowd slowly quieted, still buzzing with energy, still waiting. His silence had been more than a break. It was strategy, and now the words he was about to say had more weight because of it. Trump leaned back, arms crossed, clearly annoyed. He tried to cut in, but Obama didn't look at him. He looked at the audience instead, like they were the ones he'd come to talk to all along. And in that moment, it became clear this wasn't just about answering Trump anymore. It was about something bigger, something deeper that spoke to everyone watching at home. But before Obama's full reply came, that silence had already changed the power in the room, and everyone knew the stage belonged to him now. The moment finally arrived. Obama leaned toward the microphone, and the hall went silent again, this time not out of shock, but out of pure anticipation. You could almost feel the audience's heartbeats drop as one, waiting for the first words to leave his mouth. Obama began, his voice steady, carrying a softness that made the words hit harder. "You see, respect is never given out like a prize. It's not tied to the job you hold, or how loud you can speak. Respect is earned by the way you treat people, earned by the example you set when no one is watching, and most of all, earned by the way you listen." The crowd clapped hard, the applause rolling through the room. Trump shifted in his chair, his jaw working as if he wanted to interrupt, but the sound drowned him out. Obama didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He leaned back a little, letting the applause run its course before continuing in that same calm, deliberate tone. "Mr. President," he said, turning his gaze back to Trump. "I've been called many things in my life, some of them by people who didn't know me, some by those who didn't want to. But I'll tell you what I learned a long time ago. When people have to resort to insults, it says more about their own fear than it does about your worth." A sharp murmur went through the crowd. A man in the balcony leaned forward and muttered, "He's putting him down without even raising his voice." A Trump huffed, grabbed his microphone, and snapped back, "Don't lecture me about respect, Barack. I'm the President of the United States." His words were strong but shaky, like he was trying to grab hold of a room that had already gotten away from him. Obama didn't flinch. He let Trump's words hang in the air, then calmly replied, "Yes, you are. And that's exactly why every word you speak carries weight. The title doesn't make you bigger than the people you serve. The title should remind you that your job is to act in a way that's worthy of their trust." That line set off applause, whistles, and even a few people stomping their feet. The moderator looked out across the hall, his hands raised in a half-hearted attempt to calm the audience, but even he couldn't hide the faint smile on his face. Obama leaned in again. "You can demand someone sit down, you can try to make them smaller with words, but the truth is respect doesn't follow orders. Respect comes when you stand for something bigger than yourself." A middle-aged woman in the second row, wearing a bright red blazer, stood up and shouted, "Say that again." The crowd roared in agreement. Obama gave a small smile, then went on. "We teach our children that the measure of a man or a woman is not how much power they can grab, but how they use the power they've been given. We tell them to be fair, to be honest, to lift people up, not tear them down. Those lessons aren't complicated, they're simple, and yet they mean everything when you're trusted to lead a nation." A Trump leaned forward, cutting in again. "Oh, please. You think speeches make you great? People didn't elect me to give sermons. They elected me to fight." Obama turned to face him directly this time, his eyes calm but sharp. "You're right. They didn't elect you to give sermons, but they did elect you to lead, and there's a difference. Fighting for yourself isn't leadership. Fighting for people who don't look like you, who don't pray like you, who don't agree with you, that's leadership." The hall exploded again. Even a few Republican attendees who had come to support Trump were clapping, caught in the flow of Obama's words. Cameras zoomed in on faces, a young Latina student from Tucson wiping away a tear, an older white veteran clapping slowly with both hands, his eyes never leaving the stage. And yet, Obama wasn't done. He leaned closer to his microphone and added, almost in a whisper, "You see, Mr. President, the most powerful thing a leader can say is not sit down. It's stand up with me. That's the difference." The standing ovation that followed shook the walls. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, shouting. The sound rolled like a wave across the hall, spilling into every corner. Trump threw his hands up in frustration, muttering, "Oh, give me a break." But his voice was swallowed by the applause. He leaned back in his chair, clearly annoyed, as Obama calmly folded his hands on the desk and let the moment speak for itself. But as powerful as that reply was, the real story was just beginning. The reaction outside those walls would turn this moment into something even bigger. The ovation didn't stop quickly. It rolled in waves, one part of the hall clapping until another picked it up again, like an echo that refused to fade. The Phoenix Convention Center was no longer just a place for a meeting. It felt like a battlefield where words were weapons, and the crowd itself was caught in the fire. On the left side of the stage, a group of young activists from Los Angeles jumped to their feet, chanting, "Stand up with me." Repeating Obama's last line as if it were already a battle cry, their voices bounced off the high ceilings and got louder as others joined in. But not everyone was clapping. In the back rows, a cluster of Trump supporters waved their MAGA hats defiantly. One of them, a man with a salt and pepper beard wearing a shirt that read, "Build the Wall," yelled over the cheers, "Sit down, Obama! You had your time!" His voice was quickly drowned out by the crowd, but it highlighted the division running through the room. Reporters scribbled frantically, each one knowing their story's focus depended on where they stood in the divide. A journalist from the Arizona Republic whispered to her colleague, This isn't just a forum anymore. This is going to shape headlines for weeks. Down front, Reverend Harold Gaines from Detroit, who had flown in with his congregation, pressed his hand against his chest and shook his head. Tears were in his eyes as he whispered to the woman beside him, "That's the kind of dignity they can't take from us. That's history talking." And meanwhile, 2 rows back, a Republican governor from Nebraska leaned forward, his face tight but thoughtful. He whispered to his aide, "He's making sense, and that scares me." The aide wrote notes quickly, knowing the governor's reaction could affect how he'd have to frame his next press conference. The division wasn't just in the crowd, it was in the body language on the stage itself. Trump leaned back, arms crossed, his face set in a stubborn frown. He tapped his fingers against the desk louder now, the microphone picking up the rhythm of his irritation. Beside him, Obama's hands were still folded, his eyes scanning the audience like a teacher making sure the lesson had landed. The moderator tried once more to get control. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's please keep the discussion civil." His voice cracked, the plea almost drowned by the competing voices of cheers and shouts. But the crowd wasn't calming down. A college student from Arizona State raised his voice, shouting toward the stage, "Respect isn't about power, it's about character." His words started another ripple of applause. From the other side, a Trump supporter yelled back, "We don't need lectures, we need fighters." The 2 voices clashed in the air, a symbol of the broader division splitting America right in front of the cameras. Fox News' cameraman zoomed in on a young black girl in the audience, holding her mother's hand tightly. Her eyes were wide, her expression somewhere between fear and awe. The image captured in that exact moment would later fill social media feeds across the nation. CNN, on the other hand, kept its cameras on Obama's calm face, the perfect contrast to Trump's obvious frustration. Both networks were already creating 2 different Americas for their viewers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please," the moderator tried again, but his words were completely swallowed up. By now, the meeting was less about questions and more about raw emotions pouring out of people who felt like they were witnessing something bigger than politics. Trump leaned into his microphone, snapping, "This isn't supposed to be a pep rally for Obama! I'm the president here, not him!" His voice was strong, but instead of applause, it drew boos from parts of the audience. Obama didn't reply right away. He simply turned his head slowly toward Trump, giving him that same measured look he'd had since the start. The crowd took it as a sign of strength, and once again, applause filled the silence. Near the exits, security guards stood more alert, ready for anything. The tension was thick, not violent but charged, like a stadium split between 2 rival teams. And yet, as the shouting and applause grew, one truth became clear: the room wasn't united under one man. It was torn between 2 ideas of what leadership meant. For some, it was about force, command, and taking charge. For others, it was about patience, dignity, and self-control. What made it more powerful was that the cameras caught all of it: the anger, the applause, the tears, the frustration. Millions of Americans watching at home weren't just hearing words. They were watching a reflection of the country itself, divided and loud, but unable to look away. But the real storm wasn't in that room. It was already forming outside, where the media and social networks were getting ready to carry this clash across every screen in America. By the time the event ended, the Phoenix night sky was lit up with camera lights and satellite trucks. Reporters crowded outside the convention center like vultures circling fresh food. Microphones, cameras, and smartphones were held up in the air, each one trying to get the first reaction from attendees spilling onto the sidewalks. CNN's Jake Tapper stood just steps from the main doors, already live on air. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we saw tonight wasn't just a political clash, it was a cultural earthquake." The president's words and President Obama's response are already everywhere you can imagine. A Fox News was set up across the street, their host Laura Ingraham standing under bright lights with the convention center glowing behind her. "This is being blown out of proportion," she said into the camera. President Trump was simply being direct, as he always is. The left is trying to turn it into something racial. Meanwhile, MSNBC's Rachel Maddow leaned into her desk, shaking her head as clips played on the big screen behind her. "You cannot ignore the weight of those words. Sit down, boy. That was not a mistake. That was not an accident, and Barack Obama's response, calm, steady, dignified, only made the difference between the two men clearer. Inside Twitter's San Francisco headquarters, moderators were scrambling. The hashtag #SitDownBoy had already hit the top of the trending list in the US and was racing toward the #1 global spot. Just below it, another tag was gaining speed for Stand Up With Them, the exact phrase Obama had delivered on stage. Clips of the exchange spread like wildfire. One video taken by a college student in the balcony captured the audience's gasp in crystal clear sound. Within an hour, it had gotten 3 million views on TikTok. Another clip posted by CNN's official account showed Obama leaning into the microphone and delivering his line about respect. It had been shared over 200,000 times in less than 30 minutes. And then came the memes. Screenshots of Trump's crossed arms, an annoyed look were covered in captions like, "When the teacher calls you out in front of the whole class." Others paired Obama's calm stare with lines like, "Leadership doesn't yell, it teaches." But the frenzy wasn't just online. Across the country, evening news anchors were changing their lineups to lead with the story. In Phoenix, local station 12 News cut away from a segment about a monsoon storm to replay the confrontation. In Boston, WBZ News opened its 11 p.m. broadcast with the clip. The anchor's voice measured but with a hint of disbelief. Tonight, a moment in Arizona that has the entire country talking. Late night hosts didn't waste any time, either. Jimmy Kimmel showed the clip to his audience, who laughed, gasped, and then broke into applause at Obama's response. "I haven't seen someone get put in their place that calmly since my mother told me I was a mistake," Kimmel joked. On the other coast, Stephen Colbert looked into the camera and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, that wasn't a comeback. That was a masterclass in leadership." Not all reactions were jokes, though. On Facebook, pastors, teachers, and community leaders were writing long posts about what the moment meant. Rev. Lisa Harmon from Indianapolis wrote, "Obama reminded us that the strength of a leader isn't in tearing others down, but in showing restraint. That's what our children need to see." Her post was shared more than 40,000 times in a single night. Meanwhile, conservative commentators fought back. On Breitbart's homepage, a headline screamed, "Obama plays victim again, mainstream media cheers." Fox's Sean Hannity told his viewers, "The left is trying to make Obama a saint while ignoring the real issues. The president is a fighter, and fighters don't hold back." Still, the video was everywhere. Whether you watched CNN, scrolled Instagram, or tuned into your local ABC station, the same clip played again and again, Trump saying, "Sit down, boy," Obama pausing, adjusting his jacket, and replying with words that had more power than any insult. At 1 a.m. Eastern, Twitter's trending bar looked like a battlefield. Fan Obama response, "Fair respect is earned, has stand up with me," and Fav presidential forum. Analysts estimated that more than 50 million people had already seen the clip within the first few hours. By morning, headlines stretched across front pages. The Washington Post, "Respect versus Power, Obama silences Trump with words." The Wall Street Journal, "Forum sparks political firestorm as Obama-Trump clash." Even the Los Angeles Times simply ran the quote as its headline, "Sit down, boy." The moment wasn't staying in Phoenix. It was crawling into every living room, every phone, every conversation in the country. The story had already gotten away from the politicians on stage. It now belonged to the people. But the real question was what this would mean behind closed doors. Because while the public was glued to their screens, both Trump and Obama were going back to private rooms where the results were just beginning to show. Inside the White House residence that night, the mood was tense. Trump paced back and forth on the carpet in the Lincoln's sitting room, his tie loose and his face flushed. The TV was still on, tuned to Fox News, where Laura Ingraham was trying to defend his comments, but even her tone sounded stressed. Trump pointed his finger at the screen. "They're twisting it, twisting everything," he shouted, looking at his advisors gathered around him. "I didn't mean it the way they're saying." "It's the fake news again blowing this up. I just told him to sit down." Jason Wilkes, one of his senior aides, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Mr. President, with all due respect, the clip is everywhere. Social media isn't letting this one go. Even some of our allies are having a hard time defending it." Trump turned on him like a whip. "Struggling? That's your job. Fix it. Get Hannity, get Tucker. I want every channel reminding people that Obama was the worst president in history." The economy, the jobs, the disasters. Remind them. He slapped his hand against the arm of a chair. They can't give him the win on this.